And I'm back. Hello, everyone. Sorry for trying to get my machine to run. Everybody having a good day? Not at my level where your machine Mac blue screens right before your presentation. So I'm going to be talking about Aurelia versus Angular today. And now my thingamajig doesn't work. Ah, there it is. My name is Klug. I work as a software developer / architect / mentor / presenter at a company called Novatrox Division in Stockholm. And I spend most of my time, it feels like, running around at different conferences and trying to give away knowledge and experiences that I've learned along the way. And then once in a while, I try to go to actually clients and build stuff. Unfortunately, not as much as I'd hoped, but that's the way it is. And I am from Sweden. So anybody in here not Swedish? Pretty much all of you. That causes problems, because Swedish people don't speak English natively. So if I start going bork, bork, bork in the lever thing, and you don't understand what I'm saying, we have two options, right? Option number one, you put your arm up and you interrupt me and you ask me what I just said. I will repeat it once again. You won't understand it that time either. I'm embarrassed. You get no more information. Doesn't seem like a fantastic idea, right? Sucks for me. Option number two, you hear bork, 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 and you go, okay, he's Swedish. I understand enough to understand the gist of what he's saying. I'm just going to leave it, okay? So we've got two options. I prefer option number two. You just let it slide. If you don't want to let it slide, that's fine. Just remember, I am from Sweden, so my ancestor is this guy. And when you start interrupting me, there's just one thing you need to remember. Just going to say that. Seriously, if there's anything you don't understand, just go ahead and interrupt me. I will try and explain, and I'm actually a very nice guy. And if not, then you can come up and ask me afterwards what I was failing at. But the topic of today is Aurelia versus Angular. And first question is, actually the first question to you guys. We're going to do the classical nerd workout, which is raise one arm. How many people are doing Aurelia development today? How many people are doing Angular development today? How many have never touched any of these frameworks? Okay, that's a good mix. Mostly Angular, little Aurelia, and a bunch of people who have never seen the frameworks. So I think I'll cover it in the way where everybody understands what I'm saying. So what are they? Well, it's kind of simple. I think most of you guys would know that they are actually JavaScript frameworks. Duh. And what happened is that I've worked quite a bit with Angular. I've built Angular.js applications and Angular 2/4/ whatever they call it nowadays, formerly known as Angular 2 applications, basically since they went live with it. And then I do a bit of Aurelia, and I thought it's kind of interesting to compare these frameworks, because once you start working with them, you realize that they have a lot of similarities. And one of the team members from the Angular team actually moved over and started Aurelia. So there's a bit of crossbreeding between them. And I thought, well, let's have a look at why you would choose either or. So I picked up the things that I felt when I pick up a new framework, what is interesting to me. So I don't really care what you think. It's just me. And it's what I care about. So this is my session, okay? So I'll cover the things that I had in mind. But I've been a trainer full-time trainer for 2 years. I know pretty much the questions that you normally get asked, and I thought I'd answer those. They are JavaScript frameworks, but they have a little bit of a difference in how they look at JavaScript. So if you look at Angular, I'm going to be on the Angular side to begin with on most cases, because most of you guys have worked on Angular or know what Angular is. And Angular went ahead and they built their Angular 2 and said, we're going to build everything in TypeScript. We're going to go 100% TypeScript. We're going to embrace TypeScript. We're going to work together with Microsoft to make TypeScript better and make TypeScript something that we can use to build our system with. But they also said, since it's TypeScript and TypeScript transpiles to ECMAScript, you might as well go and write it in pure ECMAScript if you want to as well. So you can go and write Angular applications in ECMAScript 6 if you want to as well. But by default, they will TypeScript everything. So if you go into the Angular documentation site, they will have TypeScript examples for you. That's basically what they will show you, and then you have to actively go and say, I want ECMAScript. On the Aurelia side, it's a little bit different. Aurelia said, heck no, we're not doing TypeScript. We're going to do ECMAScript 6. It's good enough, it's standard-based, we'll use that. And then they said, we have that, but we do understand people liking TypeScript, so we will add TypeScript support. So they have TypeScript support by TypeScript definitions for Aurelia, but it's not written in TypeScript, which is sort of a difference. And when you go into documentation will actually default to ECMAScript. When you create a new project using the CLI, they will default to ECMAScript. So it's a little bit focus difference. To be perfectly honest, actually, for the heck of it, how many people are doing TypeScript today? How many people are doing ECMAScript? How many people wish they were doing TypeScript? That was not, hold on. Okay. The thing is, ECMAScript is fine. There's nothing wrong with ECMAScript. I actually like JavaScript. I'm one of the few people that find it quite cool to work with. But if you do ECMAScript 6, it's not going to run anywhere. Well, it's going to run in Node, but it's not going to run in your browser. So if you want something that runs in the browser, you actually have to go and transpile it, right? So if you write ECMAScript 6, you have to throw it through Babel to get ECMAScript 5 to run in your browser. If you write TypeScript, you have to throw it at the TypeScript compiler, and the TypeScript compiler gives you ECMAScript 5 that runs in the browser. My personal opinion, and this is my session, so my personal opinion is the only thing that matters in here, is that TypeScript offers us some features that are kind of cool. We get static typing, and with static typing, we get a bunch of tooling, we get a bunch of help, we get interfaces, we get classes, we got a bunch of stuff that we're used to working with if we come from a C# world, for example. But there's nothing that says that you have to write TypeScript in a TypeScript file. If you change a JavaScript file written in correct JavaScript from .js to .ts, it becomes a TypeScript file and it becomes TypeScript. You're not using TypeScript, but you've got all of the power in there if you want to. So if you choose to go the TypeScript path, you can use TypeScript where it makes sense. Where do I want to have static typing? Where do I need tooling to make this easy to use? And what part of it am I going to go completely dynamic, flexible, JavaScript, weird syntaxy stuff that nobody can ever follow along in 2 weeks and build these amazing things that only JavaScript can do? And you can just mix and match. In ECMAScript 6, you're kind of stuck with one thing. In TypeScript, you can mix as much as you want. Having said that, you can clearly understand that I love TypeScript, and I will write everything I can in TypeScript. They also have slightly different architectural views on everything. So Angular said, we're going to build components. Components is the way forward. Everybody wants components, web component this, web component that. Aurelia said, we're not doing components. We're doing MVVM. So anybody want to give me the difference between MVVM and components? I will tell you. The difference is, in components, you have a bunch of code, UI code, written in TypeScript or JavaScript, and you have a view, and you connect the code with the view with a binding context, and they are a unit that is then rendered in your browser, right? Yes, Chris, that's right. MVVM means that you have a bit of code written in TypeScript or JavaScript, and you have a view, and then you put those together using a binding context, and then you render them in the browser as a unit. So it's the same thing. No, it's not the same thing. They have different names. There is a bit more to it, but it's kind of interesting because there's very little difference. And the main difference is that components will actually say, this is my, I'm not going to call it view model because it's a component, but basically this is my code. And then as part of my code, I decorate it with a decorator and say, together with this code, I want to use this template to do the rendering. And then they're basically joined together as one unit and they will stay together for the rest of their lives. MVVM says, I will have a view model with all of my code. I will have a view and they will fit together. But there's nothing saying that this view model here has to fit together with this view here. So I can go ahead and say, I have 4 different views doing the same thing using the same view model, but with different layouts. And then I can mix and match and say, can I have that view model over there with that view over there and put those together? So in theory, you can go ahead and say, if you're on a tablet, actually, if you're on a phone, I will give you one UI. It's still going to be the same view model, but on the phone, I have something that just doesn't make sense. So I will have a view that doesn't include some of the buttons because you won't do that on a phone. But if you're on a full machine with the world's largest laptop screen and you're running with the world's highest connection to the internet and all of that, you can go and say, I'm going to have this other massive view that has all of the functionality, but they both connect to the same UI logic. Does that make sense? So that's kind of cool, right? Has that ever happened? I don't know. I have a background in Silverlight. Don't laugh at me. It was a good choice when I made it. No, it wasn't. But it should have been. And we did a lot of MVVM. And I built my own MVVM framework and looked a lot at MVVM and thought it was kind of cool. And I've gone around the world talking about it and said it's kind of cool because you can switch out the UI and the view model and you can mix and match as you want. And I have built a bunch of applications for Silverlight and .pf, and you don't mix and match. It just doesn't happen. It's a cool selling point, but honestly, no. But if you do, you can do it on the Aurelia side, but not Angular. So if you look at the code for that, right-hand side, you've got your class with your UI logic. It's a very stupid class. It doesn't have to have a lot of logic in this case, but it could have in my component. And then in my decorator, I say that this is a component, and you will find the template at this path. So they are strictly connected together one-to-one, whereas on the Aurelia side, I can use an element called compose, say, this is where you will find my view model, which is the path to my JavaScript file, and you can then get the path to the view that you want to use using view.bind and say, go and get this view over here. And then you can have logic in there that figures out what view to render for that thing and stuff on. So it's a little bit more flexible. There are also two modular frameworks. So in Angular, you do all of these imports at the top. You have this import this and import that and import. It feels like importing a gazillion things from a bunch of different modules. And you end up with 2, 3, maybe 4 different imports at the top for Angular, getting different things from different modules depending on what you're doing. Like I'll get a component from core, and I will get the router from the router module, and I might probably not pull out platform browser, but I might go and pull out the HTTP or something like that. And I will have these on different lines. In Aurelia, it's kind of nice because we only have one module. There's like one Uber module that has everything, where you go, I want to get all of these things and just get it from the Aurelia module, and I don't care that it's a modular framework, just give me whatever it is I want. That sounds awesome because it's just one import at the top. And I kind of like having few rows at the top because my code comes faster in the file. And I found this quite interesting, so I had to dig and scratch the surface a little bit. And it's awesome because the Aurelia framework file looks like this. It's basically just re-exporting all of the other modules in the whole system. So if you like the one import statement at the top that Aurelia has, go and write a file like this for Angular, and you're done with it. So you can have exactly the same feature in Angular. It's not there by default. They both also require external dependencies, that you need to add other dependencies to get your framework to work. So in the Angular side, you need to go and get zone.js, which is the way that Angular does its data binding. And since Angular uses a lot of observables, you tend to go and get reactive extensions JavaScript as well, because you want to be able to work with those observables in an easy way. On the Aurelia side, they're saying we've got two requirements, or two dependencies. The first one is Bluebird. So what's Bluebird? Bluebird is a replacement thingy for the promise implementation in your web browser, because apparently the promise implementation in Bluebird is faster than the promise implementation in your browser. I have no idea how they managed to do that, but they did, apparently. And they have required JS. So if you're building Aurelia out of the box, just stock standard Aurelia, it will use required JS. So they will have a dependency on that framework as well. And then if you might need to support that browser that should not be mentioned, you need polyfills as well. There's a browser out there that requires you to add a bunch of extra stuff because it works kind of poorly without it. So you have a bunch of polyfills, but that's the same on both sides, because they both depend on stuff that the browser that shall not be named actually doesn't implement. So what's it like getting started with it? Because step number one, when you go out from this session, you're just going to scratch the rest of the afternoon and start building stuff in Aurelia and Angular, right? So we're going to sit down there, have burgers, and write code. So how do you get started? Well, you go and get the CLI. Both frameworks come with a command line interface that you can use. You've got the Aurelia CLI and you've got the Angular CLI. And it's basically just you go npm install @angular/CLI-G and you're good. And then you go and install npm install Aurelia-CLI-G and you're good on your machine. if you have Node installed. And everybody has Node. That's just kind of everyone. Everyone has Node. So that's pretty similar. Except for the fact that Angular only has that option, basically. There are other options. You can Google it. You can go out to the web and try to find somebody that has a starter project for you, and it's going to fail, and then you go back and use the CLI. So just skip that and get the CLI to begin with. Aurelia actually comes and says, we have skeletons. So a skeleton is a starter project that Aurelia has built for you. So part of the Aurelia repo is you can go to their repo and say, I want to build an Aurelia application, and I want to have this combination of things. So Aurelia supports ECMAScript and TypeScript. They support ASP.NET Core or Node. And they support, what else? Webpack or Require.js. So you decide if you want to go and build an application that's an ASP.NET Core application using Webpack in TypeScript, they have a specific skeleton app for that configuration that you can get started with, which is quite nice. In the Angular case, it's basically, here is what you get. I don't care if you want to use ASP.NET Core. Here is the thing we're giving you, which is Node. You can also go and use Yeoman, which is a generator for solutions and files. Anybody use Yeoman? Okay, so Yeoman is cool. Unfortunately, it's kind of fallen off the face of the earth a little bit because nobody cares anymore. I'm not being mean to those of you who actually use it, because it's actually a good tool. But since everyone is getting their own CLI, people focus on their CLI instead of focusing on getting stuff into another command line interface. And then, yes, you have the starter projects that I mentioned. You can always go and Google and say, is there anybody online that has a starter project that I can use that fulfills my requirements? That is a cool way of starting, because you will find that guy that has built that specific combination that you want. But then you download it, and you spend the rest of the week trying to get it to work. And then at the end of the week, you give up, and you go and get the CLI anyway. Because there's a lot of movement in both these frameworks, especially I've tried it in Angular. There's so much movement in Angular that I often end up, when you get starter projects, and you say, oh, I have this demo, you can just download it and try it. You try to build it, and it actually explodes because they haven't kept it updated. So skeleton apps for the CLI is what I would recommend. The CLI are, well, they're both kind of similar, right? So you write AU new to get a new project, or ng new. You write AU build or ng build if you want to build your application. AU run or ng serve if you want to start up the application and look at it and start an in-memory web browser. AU test, ng test to run your tests. AU generate, ng generate. You see they're pretty similar. To do it, there are two differences that I thought was worth highlighting. Aurelia actually supports extensibility. So you can easily, in your project, go in and create an extensibility point to the Aurelia command line interface and add other generators. So if you have a specific thing that you want to be able to go out to the command line and just go, AU generate my magic cool thing, you can write that code, add it to your project, and all of a sudden you have extended your CLI with new features. And it's all built around gulp, as far as I remember. So it's quite easy to get started with. And Angular has another one that I love. Has anyone tried ng eject? No one? Oh, a couple of one. Hands, guys. When I go and ask, you go, I've tried it. No, so ng eject, I just had to pull that out because Angular CLI is a bit magical, because you go AU new, you create a new project, you go AU build, and it builds, and there's really very little configuration you can do. The CLI does everything for you, and you're kind of, what's actually happening behind the scenes? So how many of you, when you install an application, and during the install there's an advanced button in the install, do you click it? There's one honest guy, 2, 3, 4. Slowly there are more and more hands going up. I'm the same. If I can, and there is an advanced button, I have to click it. I can't remember. I have one thing that I keep installing every time I repave my machine. And when you press the advanced button, there's actually nothing to change. I love that. I would just add a message. Duh. So ng eject is my version of that. Because ng eject means that I can go into a CLI project, say ng eject, and it generates a Webpack configuration file for me, and it tells the project that you are no longer a CLI project. You cannot build this project using the Angular CLI. It's now a Webpack project. And then Webpack takes over, because Webpack is used by the CLI normally. And then when you have that Webpack file, you can see everything that's actually going on, and you can go in and mess it up, which is awesome. So a new project. It's one of those, how do you get started, that I actually kind of like, because they are slightly different. I'm just going to pull up something useful here. Let's go to there. Open the command line. Can everybody see that? Is that visible in the back? People are nodding. People have good eyesight in Norway. So we do AU new. Now actually, let's start with Angular. So I'm going to do ng new, which is new Angular project. ndc Angular demo. You press enter, and it goes, poof, I've created these files for you, and then it goes down here. It says successfully initialized Git. I didn't ask for Git. I just want to highlight that. And installing packages for tooling via npm, which is basically it runs npm install in the background, and it freezes here for a while. Very helpful. Aurelia has a different approach. AU new ndc demo, Aurelia demo. That didn't come out very well. Aurelia. I'm from Sweden. I can't spell. I'm going to blame being Swedish for everything that goes wrong. So first of all, Aurelia comes up with ASCII art, which gives them one step ahead in the game of which one is best. But what I mostly like about this is this here. What do you want to do? Do you want to do ESNext? Do you want to use ECMAScript? Do you want to use TypeScript? Or do you want to go custom? What do you think I choose? Oh yeah, we go custom. Next one. It goes back and it says, okay, sweet. Do you want to use Babel for ECMAScript 6? Or do you want to use TypeScript? I'm going to use TypeScript. As you can see, Babel, actually you might not be able to see that in the back, but it says Babel down here as the default. So I go 2, I want to go TypeScript. Next question. Would you like to set up your, how would you like to set up your templates? Do you want to have no markup processing? Do you want to have minimum markup processing? Or do you want to have maximum markup processing? My opinion on that is default none seems really boring. Minimum seems like chickening out. We're going maximum. Everything gets better if you just max everything. And then it goes, what CSS processor do you want to use? Because nobody writes CSS anymore. Everybody writes less or Sass or something else. Even I do that. I'm old school. I write CSS in a file called .less. It's just apparently not very helpful, but it looks cooler. So I'm going to say I'm going to go less. 2. Would you like to configure unit tests? That is not happening. What is your default code editor? Visual Studio Code, Atom, Sublime, WebStorm, none of the above. Look how Visual Studio is not an option. But Visual Studio Code works fine for me, so I'm going to leave that. And then it goes, so these are your choices. This is the name, your platform, the transpiler you've chosen, markup processor, CSS processor, unit test runner, editor. Is this correct? Yes. And then it goes, do you want, so basically, I have now installed the project structure. So I have my entire project structure, and I can go into code and start working on it. But do you also want me to go and do npm install for you? Yes, I do. And it runs npm install for me down here, and you can actually see what's happening, as opposed to the node that just gives you a green line saying I am doing something. Node should probably be done by now, yeah, or Angular. So that works fine. So that's the difference between creating a new project in Angular versus Aurelia, and my personal favorite is obviously Aurelia. I like having choices. I don't like somebody shoving their opinions down my throat. Not as I'm shoving my opinion down your throat, because that's a whole different story, right? You guys have paid to come and get my opinion shoved down your throat, so it's up to you. That's not my fault. So this is what you get out of a AU new and ng new. So we got pretty much the same thing. To be perfectly honest, it's a JavaScript application or a TypeScript application, and it uses the same libraries. So we've got TypeScript linting, we've got TypeScript configuration, we've got package.json because we're doing npm stuff. We've got a Karma config, which is on both sides because we've got Karma as the test runner. We've got index.html and favicon on this side because Aurelia goes and says, I'm going to serve from the root of your application. Those two files are in the src folder in Angular. We've got the editor config, which is same on both sides. So the protractor is different. There's a protractor on that side. It's not one here. If you want to do end-to-end testing in Aurelia, you use protractor on this side as well. So basically, you've got the same thing. This is a slightly different way of doing it. And also, the fact that index.html is inside the source folder has to do with how the in-memory web browser works in Angular. But honestly, it's pretty much similar. It's the same thing. And if you look at the .angular CLI.json, that's where you configure all of the CLI stuff for JSON, or for Angular in JSON. All of that configuration is available inside Aurelia_project instead for Aurelia. So even the configuration is pretty much, they've got the same configuration possibilities in both projects. So what's it like coding in the frameworks? Because I assume that once you've created your project, you do actually want to code, because you don't want to have an application that says hello world, which is what you get out of, that's what you get from Aurelia. Angular is a little bit more low-key and says app works. So building stuff is also based around two ideas. It's convention versus configuration. So Aurelia said, or rather, let's start with Angular. Angular has a bit of a feeling of, we are developers, we need to get shit working. Sorry, I'm Norway, so I'm allowed to say shit here, I think. It's not like presenting in the US where they get annoyed when saying stuff like that. It feels like Angular went, we're going to get stuff done. How do we put these things together? I need to get this, how do I configure all of it? And they wrote this configurable API, which is nice. There's nothing wrong with it. It just feels like Aurelia went and said, actually, we know what you guys are going to be doing most of the time. You will be writing view models and views, and why would you have to go and register everything and configure everything? Because you're still going to be naming your views according to some form of convention, and you're going to be naming your view models according to some form of convention. So how about we just say that if your view model is named foo.js or .ts, and your view is called foo.html, why shouldn't I be able to figure that out on my own? And it does. So basically, you don't have to go and say these things belong together. Aurelia just goes by convention and says, due to what somebody has told me, this is what I should be looking for, which is quite nice. And if you look at things like bootstrapping, it's a good example of convention-based work in Aurelia. If you start, actually, I'm going to start in Angular. I don't know why I put Angular on the wrong side all the time and in the bottom, but let's start with Angular. First of all, you have to import platform browser dynamic. That took me a while before I sort of really understood what that meant, but it means my application is going to run in a browser, and I want to dynamically compile my JavaScript as it runs. Basically, JIT compiling the thing and making it slow. And then I need to import my module, where I have my root module with all my functionality, and then I have to go and tell the platform browser dynamic that I want to bootstrap my application using this module. And then in that module, I have to register what thing I can bootstrap with. And in my view, I have to add like an element like this, saying that this is where you should be bootstrapping me and start your application. Not very complicated, but a few steps. Aurelia has a different approach. In the body tag, you create an Aurelia-app attribute, and you say main. And then you add a script tag, and you point to vendor-bundle.js with a data main Aurelia-bootstrapper. That's it. There's no extra element. There's nothing telling it what module to load and all of that. You're basically saying, in main, that means main.js. It's going to go to download main.js. In there is a bit of configuration on how to set up Aurelia for your application. And after it's run main.js, it goes and says, you didn't tell me what to load. So I'm just going to go and download a file called app.js, because that's probably what you wanted it to be called. Then it goes and sees app.js, and it loads that view model, and then it says, since you wanted to load app.js and you didn't tell me anything else, you probably want me to download app.html as well. And then they join the view model with the view and a binding context, and they insert into the body tag, and you're done. So there's a lot of stuff going on, but you don't have to care. As long as you name things right, it just works. They've also got modules in Angular and features in Aurelia. So in Angular, everything is a module. Everything has to belong somewhere. Module is like a box where you throw all the things you built inside of it. And a module is a class which has an ng module decorator. And you say, inside this module, you can find a component called myComponent. And anybody that takes a dependency on this module, called myModule, are allowed to use the myComponent. And then in my other module, I go and say, in this module that I'm creating, I want to go ahead and use that other module over there, and I have to explicitly say every single module that I want it to load. Aurelia has a different approach. They're basically saying, we'll use something called features, and a feature is a folder. So you create a folder with the name of the feature that you want to use, or the feature name you want, and inside that folder you create a file called index.ts. And you create a export one function called configure, and it takes a framework configuration, and in there you basically say, I'm a feature, and here are the things that I am offering up for everyone else to use. And once you've created the different features that you want, so you've got one for user maintenance and one for user handling, and you've got one for signing in and one for article handling and stuff like that, you just go ahead and say, in your main TS file, you say aurelia.use.feature, and you give it the name of the folder that you want to load, and it automatically figures everything out. Components, I mentioned the components versus MVVM. And if we look at Aurelia, we look at Angular to start with, as usual. Go to component, have a template. Inside of my template, I have a my-other-component, and it just works. If my-other-component is registered in this module or in another module that also has that component as exportable out of that module, and this module takes dependency on that other module. Yep. That wasn't very complicated, it's just very hard to say. But basically, you have to configure everything for this to work. So my other component is awesome, and it's not going to complain unless you forget to configure everything to fit together so that my-other-component is available. Aurelia goes and says, so we don't have just globally available components. We actually have local components as well, just as we have in Angular with components registered in the module but not in the exports. And when they're not registered as global components, you have an element called require. So inside of my template for this view, and all templates in Aurelia has to be surrounded by a template tag, it says, I want you to go and require from /my-other. And then it goes and said, my-other is probably going to be a JavaScript file. So I'll go and download the my-other.js file, and that's my view model. And then it's going to download my-other.html, which is my template for that view model. And then out of that my-other.js file, it's going to look and it's going to find an exported class called my-other with Pascal casing. Then it says Pascal casing my-other turns into my-other for the view. So it basically takes Pascal casing and converts it to dash casing or kebab casing or whatever you want to call it by convention. Or I can go in and globally make it available and say this thing is available everywhere and I don't need to do the require. But if I do require, I can then just use my other. So inside each one of my views or my templates, I can go and say I need these other things as well, and it's pretty explicit what it needs to load. Syntax-wise, they are very similar in what they can do. The only difference is, do you like to use weird characters or do you like to use dots? Because if you're on the Angular side, if you want to bind the href link, you put brackets around it. Brackets is telling Angular that this is a one-way binding from my view model to my view, get it sorted for me. And Aurelia says href.bind. href.bind tells Aurelia that I want to bind, the href property, that's pretty obvious, to this thing here. And the bind thing is smart enough to figure out that href is a one-way binding. It only goes from the view model to the view, so I'll only set up a one-way binding for you. You can explicitly say href.two-way and href.one-way and href.one-time to get different types of bindings, but by default you generally just go href.bind. For writing out text, you use handlebars or mustache syntax with double curly braces on the Angular side. And Aurelia said, no, we're doing the ECMAScript way. Because ECMAScript has the $curly brace as a standard notation for string interpolation in ECMAScript. So they thought they would use the standard. I don't know if it makes a difference, but they have a different syntax. And if you want to do events, you want to listen to clicks or updates and things like that, in Angular you do parentheses around whatever event you want to listen to, and you tell it what should happen. And on the Aurelia side, you say click.trigger or click.delegate. And you give it what should happen. I do believe that my code here is wrong, because I do believe it's supposed to be click.delegate in this case. Because they're kind of cool in the way that they save some potential issues in Aurelia, where if you use click.trigger, I think it's this way around. If you use click.trigger, it creates an event handler on this button. If you use click.delegate, they actually set up a single event handler at the top of the page. So if you have a bunch of different click event handlers for a bunch of different buttons on the same page, they will actually just set up a single handler at the top of the page and let the event bubble up. And when it comes to the top, they will figure out what button was clicked and then call you. So you don't end up with 15, 20 different click handlers. You get one, and they will make sure that it's more efficient. And then some events you can't do that with. So you should always use that bubbling thing unless you can't use that bubbling thing, and then you need to use the other one. And when is that? I don't know. Read HTML spec. It's easy to find out. What else have we got? Two-way data mining. On Aurelia, value.bind, which is a syntax we recognize, and they're saying it's a value on an input. That's a two-way data binding. I will set up two-way data binding for you. On the Angular side, they said, no, we're going to use a very weird syntax, which is bracket, parenthesis, ng model, parenthesis, bracket. And it has to be brackets before parentheses, because otherwise it doesn't work. Anybody going to forget that? Yes, every single time I write this, I keep questioning myself, what order was it? It's easy. It's called the banana in a box syntax. Yep. I am not kidding you. That is the official syntax name for that syntax, and that's one reason not to use it. But that sets up a two-way data binding. Also requires you to take dependency on an extra module. So two-way data binding is not in Angular by default. You actually need a separate module for two-way data binding. And then we have something called hashbang tbname. The hashbang thingy basically says, I want to have a local variable in my template that points towards this input field. And then later in my template, I can then write tbname.value to get the value property of the input field. So it's a local variable inside of my template. And Aurelia says we support that too, but we got a better syntax because we say element.ref that people can understand, and it does the same thing. What else have we got? Hide and show things is pretty cool, very, very common to do. Angular side, you do the asterisk. There's no more stage out there. I'm just going to move, sorry. Asterisk ngIf, another one of those cool characters. I guess most of you guys are from Norway, right? Yep. So you probably have a keyboard very similar to mine. Yep. Does it suck to do weird characters? Yes. Because you end up doing this thing all the time. It's just stupid. Get an English keyboard, much, much better, and then you can't write Norwegian, which sucks. So you're stuck in nowhere. It's just going to not work. But so if you go with Aurelia, you don't have to sit there like this the entire day trying to figure out what to click or press. Because Aurelia went and said, we're going to use our dot notation, so we're just going to do if.bind. So we're going to do bind. It's a binding, and it's for if, so we'll do if.bind. Syntax for repeating things, asterisk ng4 equals let x of items. That's fairly simple. Let x of items is standard ECMAScript 6 syntax for a for of loop, not a for in loop, but a for of. But there's also a little pipe async at the end. So Angular actually expects you to expose observable objects out of your view models or your components, and then let your template handle the fact that they are async. That is kind of cool, and it has some massive benefits because you don't mess up and cause a memory leak. And apparently memory leaks are bad. Doing this, everything just works. On the Aurelia side, they're saying, nope, you have to handle all of it yourself with async stuff. On the other hand, we don't use observable everywhere, so it's actually quite easy on the Aurelia side. And their syntax is repeat.for x of items. So it's not very, very different from the Angular side. So I'm actually not going to be building anything because we have a slightly short session here. But I do want to show you just a little bit about the configuration stuff I was talking about. So I'm going to go here into Austin, Aurelia. So if we look at Angular to begin with, we'll open code here. We'll open code here. There it is. And we'll just see if code will actually let me do something today. Oh, it's a reboot. Let's see if there's a second one. It's getting better. My machine used to have to reboot or restart VS Code twice every time I opened an Angular project for some reason. It's down to 1 now. So this is a standard project. I haven't done a whole lot. The only thing I've done is I've gone into the source and started writing my app. So in here, in my main TS, you see that bootstrapping stuff that I showed you with platform, browser dynamic, bootstrap module, and all of that. That's proper, just Angular out of the box. And then I started writing my application. So I have an app in here, and inside of my app, I have let's close that down. I have an app module, and inside my app module, I go and I import all of the other modules I need. So I import the browser module, ng module to do the decorator, the forms module, the HTTP module, the router module, my Spotify module that I built. I imported some components and a whole bunch of things. And then I went in here and I said, this is my module, and I've got one component in here, my app component. I require all of these other modules. And remember, browser modules should always just be in your root module, and then you should use common module in everything else, because there's some weirdness there. And I have to register and say that the app component can be used for bootstrapping. And I create some routes up here to do my routing for my navigation. Basically saying that when you go to /Spotify, show this component. When you go to /nothing, redirect to /Spotify. And then I register my routes here using the router module to get everything going. App component, very simple thing. Later. Very simple thing, doesn't do a whole lot. It just points to a template URL, a style URL, and a selector that should be what you use to show this component. And it has a very, very simple template where it basically says, here's a title that's data bound, and here is where I want to do all of my navigation. Not very complicated, but there's still a bit of stuff going on in here with registering other modules and components. And then I went and I built a module on my own, because I like Spotify, and their API is really cool to work with. So I created a Spotify module. Once again, import all of the modules that I need, import the service that I've created to do my searches, import all of my components that I've got, set up my module, declare that I want these two other modules. These components here are available in this module, but only this component is allowed to be used outside of this module. And, oh, by the way, here's also a Spotify service if you need to do anything with the service. Actual implementation of everything is actually quite simple. It's just a simple component, has a template, has a search thingy, and I expose a promise in this case. So I actually expose the asynchronous operation straight into the view. And then in my component here, I data bind that in here into another component. But the main important thing here is to have a look at all of the registration stuff. There's not a lot of registration in here because I only have like 2 components. But when you start writing this code and you keep adding new components and adding new functionality, you keep jumping back and forth between adding a new component here, and then I have to go and register that thing there, and I have to remember to register this module over here. And then you go and compare that to Aurelia. And I know I sound very pro Aurelia. That's because I like to point out the things that are different, and they have some really cool stuff. So what Aurelia does instead is that reboots as well. In their app.ts, which is where they start, they just go ahead and say, I have some router configuration stuff that needs to be done, so here's my router configuration. Looks pretty much the same, but instead of having to import my different components and stuff, I just give it paths. So this is where this is the path relative to this thing where you will find the view model that I want you to load. And then it automatically figures out that if you want to go and get ./Spotify/Spotify-search, you want to get the JavaScript file for this view model, and you want to get the HTML file for the template. So it just figures it out for me. And inside my main TS, I say I have a feature called Spotify, so I need to register my feature as such. But I give it the name of that folder. It looks into that Spotify folder. It finds an index.ts file. By convention, it should have one of these functions. And here I say, anybody that uses this feature should have this view model available for use. And inside Spotify search, I have this class here called Spotify Search, and convention-based says that Spotify Search in Pascal casing becomes Spotify Search using kebab casing, and whenever you want to show that in the UI, you just use Spotify Search in kebab casing inside of an element, and you're done. So there's no other configuration going on here. I don't have to tell it anything. Service, for example, the Spotify service that I created, this thing here, I do have to add an auto-inject here saying that I want you to do dependency injection in this class. So whenever this thing is instantiated, I want you to go ahead and dependency inject it. But the cool thing is that the actual service is not registered anywhere. There's no registration of what services are available. This is just a class. Whenever I want to use it, I go and I pull in my Spotify service up here from the path. I auto-inject it, and I put it up as a constructor parameter. And Aurelia will just go and say, oh, so you asked for an instance of this thing. You probably mean that that is a service that you want me to instantiate, and it goes to instantiate it for you without you having to register it. And you can also go in and make some changes and say, this should be a singleton, this should be a transient one, and you can change the way that your services are handled, their lifetime is handled. So there's a lot less of the boilerplate configuration stuff than you would get in Angular when using Aurelia. Anybody write tests? Because I obviously don't do. You saw that when I created my application. For you guys who love creating tests and love creating JavaScript tests, also called masochists, you have all of that pre-set up. Both of the frameworks use Jasmine and Karma for your unit test. For end-to-end tests, they both use Jasmine and Protractor. It's even at the point where I think that Aurelia uses a Protractor fork that Angular has created. So Aurelia is really piggybacking on Angular's work within the Protractor stuff. So that's pretty much the same. Nothing spectacular between the frameworks. Building stuff, I got really annoyed by building stuff, which is why I put this slide in here, and I want to see which one is the most complicated to build. Anybody find building JavaScript applications complicated nowadays? So it's 3 hands, and then a whole bunch of people who have never built JavaScript applications. Because it sucks. So I pull it out, and I figure out, okay, so Angular has the CLI, so you do CLI, and you do AU build, and it builds it for you. No, sorry, NG build, and it builds it for you. And it uses Webpack behind the scenes, but you don't have to care. It just works. It's like a Mac. And if you want to, that took a while before somebody, if you want to do ng eject, you get the Webpack file, and you're in Webpack land, and then you use Webpack. Or you can go and use system.js and manually configure everything. Anybody ever try that? I did. If you did that, never do it again. If you have an application using Angular that uses system.js right now, go home and change it before you go to the next session. And by the way, it's going to take you about a week to get sorted out. So don't use that Webpack. Every single day of the week, Webpack or Angular CLI, which uses Webpack. On the Aurelia side, it's a little bit different. They actually default to require JS. But and that's if you use the CLI. So if you use the CLI to build, you require JS. You can manually set up required JS, or you can go and use Webpack. They have skeleton apps for Webpack, so you can't use the CLI to start a new Webpack-based project. It will probably be there in the future. And what I heard last week from Ashley Grant, who's one of the core contributors to the project, they are looking at making Webpack default. So they are moving to Webpack as well, probably. I'm just reading between the lines, they are moving to Webpack, but he didn't want to say it like that. Is this recorded? Hi, Ashley. Isomorphic stuff. So if you want to be able to render your application on the server and serve up static HTML, which is kind of cool, you can do that in Angular. Angular has something called Angular Universal that renders on the server, generates static HTML, sends that down to the browser, and then you can either go ahead and add Angular down in the client and basically rehydrate your application, but the user gets all of the data straight away, instead of going, here is the application, it's empty, I'm now loading my Angular application, it's now semi-empty, I do a request to the server to get the data, and here is what you wanted to see. You can go and say, here is what you wanted to see, I'll add Angular and rehydrate the thing and make it dynamic. Or you can just go and say, I'll just serve it up statically. So if you don't have JavaScript activated, or you happen to be a web crawler for a search engine, I will just serve static stuff, and whenever you click a link, instead of it being dynamically navigated, I will just do a post back to your server or get to your server and get a static version back. Aurelia doesn't have that at the moment, but they've said that it's on the way. So hopefully it will be there in the future. They have a proof of concept, but apparently they didn't like the way it worked, so they're working on something else. I also tried to get the Angulars and Aurelia compared with size, just for the heck of it. So I went ng and au new, created a new project. I built it according to prod, which is basically production settings. On Angular, you do ng build -prod for production and --aot to do a header type compile, which makes your application a little bit smaller and fantastically much faster in the browser. And it ends up being 4 files by default after I remove the forms bundle. And it ends up being 312 kilobytes. I don't suck at math, but I think it does. And then I went and did the same thing for Aurelia, and it comes out as 2 packages, and it's 1 kilobyte plus 395, so it's 396. If 312 to 395 kilobytes is a problem for you because Aurelia is 80 kilobytes heavier than Angular, first of all, you're wrong, because it doesn't matter that much, because 80 kilobytes, most people can handle that. Second of all, you shouldn't be using any of these frameworks if that's the problem, because we're looking at half a meg, not really, but 400 Ks before you've even loaded your own stuff there. So when you start building your stuff, this is just going to grow. So you will probably, in a slightly larger application, end up with JavaScript reaching the amount of maybe a meg-ish. If you don't do AOT and production builds, actually do just builds on your local machine, an empty Angular application ends up at something like 2.4 megs. JavaScript is heavy, apparently. So what about documentation? Anybody love documentation in open source projects? Anybody find open source projects often lacking in the area of documentation? I will give a big gold star to a person that gets involved in an open source project and just does documentation. I need to find more of those people. Just go around the world crawling for open source project and write documentation. I would love you. So I looked at them, and it's kind of cool because they both have awesome documentation. They both have registered IO domains, so we know that they are cool. That's number one. Has to be on IO. And Aurelia has a bit more of fluff. A bit more, how do I get started, installing Node and installing my environment and getting basically up to speed. Whereas Angular doesn't have that, but they have auto-built samples. So when they release a new version, the samples on their web page are apparently automatically rebuilt and redone and tested and everything, so that the code on their web page will always work in the latest version that they have released. That is cool. But that's a technical geek thingy, so other than that, it's pretty much even. What about the community? Ashley smacked me regarding this, because I compared them on the community, and he thought that I was wrong, and I was. So I tried to make it better, and I was wrong again, but I'll try my best. It's actually quite hard to compare community, apparently. I went to GitHub. Angular puts all of their stuff into one repo. So all of their modules are in one repo, which makes it ridiculously easy to go in and say, how many commits have you guys got? How many issues do you have? And how many contributors do you have? So there are about 7,800 as of yesterday commits to Angular's repo and 1,440 issues. And then Aurelia decides to have one repo per module, which makes it really hard to figure out what the commit count is and stuff like that. So somebody had written a cool NPM module that would actually get everything from Aurelia, which then gives me commits that are not into Aurelia, but into other Aurelia-ish things. So it's slightly off, but they end up at 4,800. Having that said, Angular also includes the Angular website, so they're both freakish off. But what I want to come up with is there's more stuff happening on Angular on GitHub than there is on this side. Contributors, I have no idea. I didn't even get there. It was just too hard to do. I went to Stack Overflow. Anybody go to Stack Overflow? It happens, right? Most of us do. Yeah. Stack Overflow is awesome. If it's on Stack Overflow, you're good. So Angular, 49,700 plus questions about Angular when you search for it. 55,200 are tagged with Angular 2. Aurelia, 5,100 if you search, and 2,300 if you look for tags. There's apparently more stuff happening on the Angular side of things. Ashley's suggestion to this is one that I also tried to use, which is interesting. You can always twist numbers, right? Can you imagine how good Aurelia is when they only needed half as many commits to become perfect? They have way less bugs, and it's so easy to use that there are way less questions on Stack Overflow. So it's just there are no problems with their framework. I have a different interpretation of the numbers, and I think you do too. But it's one way of looking at it. Backing behind Aurelia, you got Bluespire, which is a consultant agency that consults on Aurelia. They build Aurelia, and they have consultancy where you can go and get stuff built with Aurelia, and you can get professional help from those guys. Angular has a small company called Google. Google has a staff of full-time employees working on Angular. Aurelia has open source with, as far as I know, not a single full-time person on the framework. So it's a little bit of a difference between who's behind it. And I assume, considering the conference that we're at, that you are Microsoft developers, right? So we like Microsoft things. What happens when you're a front-end web developer and you say that you work with Microsoft technologies? Oh, you're wrong. Node. Everything is Node. You use Visual Studio? You're wrong. Just throw that out. I use ASP.NET. No, wrong. Just skip that. Node. And it's kind of like that on the Angular side. There's very little information on how to get Angular to work nicely together with ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core. It's not hard, but there's just very little documentation on it. On the Aurelia side, they will actually help you. So if you do au new -- here inside of a folder that's an ASP.NET Core application, they will set up an Aurelia application configured to work together with ASP.NET Core and copy things to the right folders, and all your builds will work. So they do help out. They even have skeleton apps that will use ASP.NET Core. So there's a bit of Microsoft love in there. And if you want to use other Microsoft stuff, have a look at these templates here for ASP.NET Core that Steve Sanderson has built. They are awesome. They have pre-built templates for Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code for React, Angular, Vue, and something else. And they have all the bells and whistles, and it's really hard to understand, but Steve is smarter than me. So what's my conclusion? That is kind of my conclusion. It's a heavyweight thing against a lightweight open source thingy, very few people behind it. But to be perfectly honest, my conclusion is that if you like conventions and MVVM, go Aurelia. If you like configuration and components, go Angular. If you feel that you want something that's easy to use, getting started with, it's just everything kind of just falls into place if you do just name things right, Aurelia is the way to go. It's really easy to use, really easy to get started with, but they do have a lacking community. If you need help, there's not as much to get. If you like doing configuration components, you want to have a big community, easy to get help, Angular is the way to go. I really wanted to come out at the end and say, you should choose X. I can't. They are too similar. They do both things, all things pretty much well. They do the same things, so you can choose whatever you want, to be perfectly honest. That's pretty much everything I had to say. And I'm 1 minute past, I think. But I hope you got something out of it. And if you have any questions, I will be around here now and later on and tomorrow. So just come and tap me on the shoulder and ask any questions that you have. Thank you.